Okay, this is going to be the review for portion webs. With portion webs, it's one of the tools we use to show the connection between the different representations of portions. Those representations will include the fractions, the decimals, the percentages, and inside will also include the words and the diagrams. Okay, but we're really going to focus on how to convert between fraction, decimal, and percentages in this section. Okay, so for the fractions, let's figure out how to connect them to the other portions. Well, how do I connect the fractions? Oops, that's supposed to be an arrow. How do I connect the fractions to the percents? Okay, well, to convert fractions to percentages, we need to remember what percents mean. And most of you guys, if you guys are in my class, you guys should remember that percent means out of 100. Okay, so what that means is that we need to get a fraction out of 100. Okay, so if we have, let's say, the fraction 3/5, okay, how do I get this fraction out of 100? And the strategy, hopefully remember to do so, is called the giant 1. Now, I'm not going to really review how to use the giant 1. We're going to use that, however, in our example. To get this percent out of 100, we need the denominator as 100, okay? So we need to think 5 times what is 100? 5 times 20 is 100, okay? Or 100, oops, I don't know why I put the extra 0. Or 100 divided by 5 is 20. So we get this giant 1. 3 times 20 is 60. So we'll get this equivalent fraction of 60 over 100. And, well, what's out of 100? Well, the 60 is out of 100. The 60 is out of 100. So this is going to equal to 60%. 60%, 60 out of 100. Okay. The other portion we want to be able to convert fractions to is fractions to a decimal. We didn't really learn this method. Oftentimes what we'll do is we'll go from the percent. So to go to a decimal, we could go from the percent to the decimal. Okay, and we'll review how to do that in a minute. So that's going to equal 60 hundredths or 6/10 if we get it from here, the 3/5. Or what we could do is we could actually just divide. Okay, and we talked very briefly about this, especially if you went to the tutoring. Well, a way to remember this is top dog in the house. So when we divide the house is there, the top dog we're going to talk about is the numerator if we're doing the 3/5 again. So the top dog is the numerator, or the top number. That's going to be in the house. Okay, get it? House, top dog. Okay, and so the other number, the denominator, is the 5 outside. And we're just going to divide 3 divided by 5. 5 can't go into 3, so I'm going to go ahead and put a 0 there. Out of 3.0. 5 goes into 36 times exactly, so we're going to have 6/10. Okay. Okay, well, what about the other portions? Let's take a look. So we went from fractions to percents, fractions to decimals. Now let's take a look at the percents. How to go from percent back to a fraction, a percent to a decimal. Okay. Well, let's see, percentages. Okay, let's go from percent to a fraction. This is actually pretty easy. Let's think of another fraction. Maybe, I don't know, 3/4. Okay, how we do this is we're just going to think again a percent. Oops, sorry, we need to think a percentage, right? So to convert a percentage to a fraction, we again think of percentage means out of 100. Okay, so if we have something like, I don't know, 83%, okay, that's 83 out of 100. So that as a fraction is just 83 out of 100. So that's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. Okay, so that's the percentage to a fraction. Let's look at percentage to a decimal. Okay, percentage to a decimal. Okay, to do this, if we have, let's just look at 83% again. We could really think place values. In other words, since it's 83% means 83 out of 100, every percentage or every percent is a hundredth. Okay, so if this is 83 out of 100th, that means we have 83 hundredths. So as a decimal, this would just be 0 and 83 hundredths. If we had something like, I don't know, 90%, this is going to just equal 0 and 90 hundredths. If we have 150%, that means we have 150 hundredths. So we're going to have 1 and 50 hundredths. This is the hundredths, 50 hundredths. 1 whole is 100 hundredths. Okay, so 100% is equal to 1 and 50 hundredths. Okay, lastly, we're going to go from decimals. Let's see what color I want to use. We're going to go from decimals, and from the decimals, we're going to go back to the percentages and also back to the fractions. Cannot spell decimals today. Okay, for decimals to percentages, percents. Okay, to convert a decimal to a percent, we just think place values. If I have 0 and 6 tenths, okay, this is the tenths. We read this as 0 and 6 tenths, so we just think as a fraction. Okay, how do I write 6 tenths as a fraction? 6 tenths. Okay, and we could go ahead and simplify this if we need to. But we really don't need to think about that this time. Let's think of another. So what about 1 and 43 hundredths? Okay, if we read that correctly, this is the whole, tenths, hundredths. Okay, so we're going to have one whole, and how many hundredths? 43 hundredths. 43 hundredths. 1 and 43 hundredths. Okay, so that's decimal to percents. And then finally, we're going to do decimals. I'm sorry, the whole time we just did decimal to fractions. Let's go ahead and just say this to fractions. Okay, now decimals to percents. Okay, we still would think place values. Let's think back 0 and 6 tenths. Well, 0 and 6 tenths, this is tenths. We need hundredths, right? Because percents are out of 100. So this is the tenths. If it doesn't say the hundredth, that means there is 0 in the hundredths place. So how many hundredths do I have? I have 60 hundredths. 60 hundredths means 60%, because again, every 1 percentage is 1/100th. If I have 0 and 4 tenths, that's going to equal 40%. Okay, this is the tenths, this is the hundredths, 40%. If I have 1 and 25 hundredths, I'm going to, this is the tenths, hundredths, I have 125 hundredths. That's 125%. Okay, so we actually looked at the different, all the different conversions. Fractions to decimals, we use giant 1 to convert to percent, the fractions. For the decimal, we just do the division. Okay, for the percents to a fraction, we just think out of 100. 83% is 83 out of 100. From a percent to a decimal, we just look at the every percent is 100th. Okay, so for instance, 83% means there's 83 hundredths, 90% means there's 90 hundredths. And then finally, for the decimals to fractions, we go ahead and we just look at the place values. Okay, if it's tenths, we have 6 tenths. Hundredths, 1 and 43 hundredths. Decimals to percents, we just have, again, we look at the place values. Okay, the decimals, tenths. Okay, and we look and see how many hundredths we have. We have 60 hundredths, 60%. 40 hundredths, 40%. 1 and 25 hundredths, 125%.